Joining us now to talk about Senator Obama's trip and its effect on the presidential campaign, two key supporters who are on the vice presidential watch lists. Senator Joe Lieberman, an independent Democrat who supports McCain, and Senator Evan Bayh, who backs Obama. And Senators, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks, Chris.
As we discussed with Admiral Mullen, Iraqi Prime Minister Maliki seemed over the weekend to endorse Obama's plan for pulling combat troops out of Iraq by mid-2010, within 2 years. Now he's apparently backed off that. But Senator Lieberman, the Iraqis clearly want us out sooner rather than later, and they would like on a timetable. Why is Senator McCain resisting that?
Well, we, as Senator McCain and I and others, want us out of Iraq sooner rather than later, but we want us out in a way that does not compromise all the gains that American and Iraqi forces have made in Iraq, which Admiral Mullen spoke to. And frankly, we want to stay there to a victory, because we don't want all those who have served in the American uniform there to have served or in some cases died in vain. Remember this, Chris. We wouldn't be having this discussion about how to get out unless the surge, which John McCain courageously fought for, taking on the president of his own party, popular opinion, risking his campaign, and which Senator Obama opposed, worked. So I think that's the good news. I think everybody, that is Prime Minister Maliki, President Bush, people like John McCain and I agree, sooner we're out the better, but it has to be based on conditions on the ground. Senator Obama doesn't seem to feel that way. It looked like he did a little bit after the primaries were over, but then he pushed by MoveOn.org and others on the anti-war left of the Democratic Party is back to a rigid timeline.
Let me talk to Senator Bayh about that. Admiral Mullen didn't mention Obama, but he did say this idea of a timetable for getting out in 2 years is dangerous. Why not agree that you're going to make any decisions based on conditions on the ground, Senator?
Chris, I think it's important to note that Barack Obama's judgment about these issues has been excellent from the beginning, the kind of judgment you'd want in a commander-in-chief, and others are now beginning to adopt his positions. We wouldn't be discussing surges in Iraq or anything else if Barack had had his way. We wouldn't have started that war to begin with. He was right about Afghanistan. That's the place from which we were attacked. He's been calling for more troops there now for over a year, and John McCain, to his credit, has now come around and adopted Barack's point of view on that. He has been for, as you say, a phased withdrawal from Iraq. As we heard, Prime Minister Maliki has embraced a more definitive timeline, whether it's the 16 months or something else, but clearly they want a more definitive timeline. And even President Bush now is coming up with a variety of euphemisms, aspirational goals, time horizons. I mean, it's starting to sound pretty much like a timeline to me. So it's common sense, Chris. Any important enterprise, certainly something as important as a war, you want to have a plan. And a plan has to have some idea of what it's going to cost, what the adverse consequences are going to be, and how long it's going to take. So 16 months seems to be a reasonable goal. Let's work toward that. Let's bring this to a conclusion in a responsible way and focus on Iraq where the focus should have been all along.
But Senator Bayh, even the Washington Post criticized Obama this week for, and let's put it up on the screen, his iron timetable, accusing him of foolish consistency and that he's ultimately indifferent to the war's outcome. And here's an exchange between Obama and McCain this week.
We can safely redeploy our combat brigades at a pace that would remove them in 16 months. That would be the summer of 2010.
And I'm really astonished that he should give a policy speech on Iraq and Afghanistan before he goes to find out the facts.
Again, two questions really, Senator Bayh. Why the, quote, iron timetable that the Washington Post talks about? And secondly, this issue, why announce your policy before you go to Iraq and talk to the generals and the Iraqis?
A couple of things, Chris. First, General Petraeus was asked recently about whether a 16-month period was a reasonable period of time, and he said it would depend on a variety of factors. He didn't say it was unreasonable. We've been there, will have been 16 months from when the next president is inaugurated, almost 7 years. We've spent $700 billion. Just think of all the other things we could have done. Finished Afghanistan, energy security for our country with those amount of resources. What's really surprising is that John, a man I admire and respect, says that even knowing there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, knowing all the consequences that have been adverse in Afghanistan because of our fixation on Iraq, he would do this all over again. That's what is really surprising. So Barack thinks that 16 months from January is a reasonable period of time. Let's go for it. Let's see. Let's try and bring this to a conclusion on that time frame. If there are difficulties, we'll address them when they arise.
Look, the fact is that if Barack Obama's policy on Iraq had been implemented, Barack Obama couldn't go to Iraq today. It wouldn't be safe. Barack Obama and John McCain saw the same difficulty in Iraq. John McCain had the guts to argue against public opinion, to put his whole campaign on the line, because, as he says, he'd rather lose an election than lose a war that he thinks is this important to the United States. The reason I say if Barack Obama's policy had been implemented, if Barack Obama's policy in Iraq had been implemented, he couldn't be in Iraq today, it's because he was prepared to accept retreat and defeat, and that would mean today Al-Qaeda would be in charge of parts of Iraq. Iranian-backed extremists would be in charge of other parts of Iraq. There'd be civil war and maybe even genocide. And the fact is that we are winning in Iraq today. And, you know, you can't choose, as Senator Obama seems to think, to lose in Iraq so you can win in Afghanistan. The reality is, if we lost in Iraq, which Obama was prepared to do, we would go to Afghanistan as losers. Instead, Al-Qaeda has its tail tucked between its legs as it's exiting Iraq to go to try to take up the fight in Afghanistan.
I have to respond to that. Barack Obama was not for losing in Iraq. Barack didn't want the war to begin with. John McCain opposed surging troops in Afghanistan until last week.
Yeah,
was John for losing in Afghanistan? I don't think so. And now you have Maliki, even President Bush are moving toward Barack Obama's position. His judgment was right.
Gentlemen, we could continue this.
Bottom line, no question that Barack Obama was prepared to lose in Iraq.
That's not true.
Whether it was right or wrong.
Gentlemen, you're going to have to agree to disagree. I want to move on to the whole issue of his trip this week. Senator Lieberman, the McCain camp seems divided about whether this is a legitimate fact-finding trip or a political stunt. After McCain and the Republican Party taunted Obama for not going to Iraq, has that in fact backfired on them by making this an even bigger story?
No, I don't think so. I think John McCain's challenge to Barack Obama is very important, and frankly it says a lot more than whether McCain was right about Iraq and Obama was wrong. It says what kind of leaders these people will be as president. John McCain reached a decision about what to do in Iraq based on what he saw there, what he heard, what he heard from the generals and from the soldiers, and then he had the guts to fight big interest to see, including public opinion, to see that would happen. Senator Obama was taking positions about Iraq to put us on a rigid timeline to get all troops out by March 2008, all combat troops. That's what he said. That would have been accepting defeat there. And I think what it says about the two of them, this is the kind of president John McCain will be on the economy. We're in crisis. We need a president who will listen, learn, decide what's right for the country, not what's right for their political campaign, and fight for the American people to make that happen.